Hi, how are you? My name is Michael Waltman, and today I'm going to be giving you this talk about how to teach players with level design. So, who the heck is this guy? So, like I just said, my name is Michael, or Mike Waltman. I'm a level designer of 3 years, and I'm a bachelor's degree graduate from Champlain College. I interned on Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 Plus 2 at Vicarious Visions, and I'm currently working with an indie studio on a thing I can't talk about, but trust me, it's pretty cool. On the right, there's a wonderful rendition of me. That's what I look like IRL. And so my likes and dislikes, I like fighting games. I like the number 7 from Jersey Mike's, Breakcore roguelikes, and Pokemon. Dislikes, it's pretty self-explanatory. So what's going on? Enough about me, right? So what I'm going to be talking about today is we're going to go do a brief overview of how games teach players mechanics naturally, an example of this formula of how this is introduced to players in experience in game, breaking down a short bit of a level to show how it follows these talking points, and talk about what the point of a level even is, right? That's kind of big. Along with this, we're also going to do suggestions on how to practice, it's the best way to improve, and some overview of some strong level design resources for learning and stuff. So, what the hell is level design? In my opinion, it's intent. Level designers are like trip planners, you know? You get to pick the locations you stop at. You get to determine how long you're going to stay there. You get to determine what you're going to do while you're there. How many people go, and any fun surprises along the way. And you might be asking, oh, intent, what the hell does that mean? So we're going to look at these two pictures. What is the difference between these two pictures, right? But this is a video, so that's kind of like a rhetorical question. So, Super Mario Brothers on the left is a game that wants to teach its players how to play the game, right? The formula, we're going to go over this a little bit more after I'm done with this slide, but is to introduce mechanics, repeat mechanics, advance and challenge those mechanics, and then add mechanics on top. It's a 2D game. It's about jumping compared to a 3D multiplayer shooter, right? The point of Mario is to complete the level. This has a drastically different intent than a COD multiplayer level. And then on to Rust, right? Does COD want to teach its players anything with its multiplayer levels? I'm not a COD developer, but the intent of a competitive shooter level is most likely to create a balanced and interesting. And then on to Rust, right? Does COD want to teach its players anything with its multiplayer levels? I'm not a COD developer, but the intent of a competitive shooter level is most likely to create a balanced and interesting level space for the players to traverse. Levels like these, whose intent isn't really to teach the player, likely don't apply to the talking points of this video. But it could be, depending on what you're making. There's some crazy stuff out there. So genre and intent will likely determine how you design a level. Along with this, the level's chronological order in your game will likely play a pretty substantial part in how your level is designed. Mario, I'm going to be talking about Mario a lot, or referencing Mario a lot in this talk, but level 1 compared to the final level of a Mario game are two drastically different things, right? And most importantly, what kind of game you want to make will have the final say. Plenty of games deviate from this formula and don't apply in the slightest, right? Not every game's intent is to make it a very enjoyable and non-frustrating experience to learn how to play the game. There's a lot of games, there's an entire subgenre of games called rage games, right? They exist for a reason. People play them, nothing wrong with it. Speaking of rage games, so there's a huge difference between these two. Super Mario World on the left for the SNES and a ROM hack of it called Grand Poo World on the right. These two games have drastically different intent. Right, Super Mario World on the left is like an officially licensed Nintendo game, right? Pretty fun, I gotta say. I like the game. Grand Poo World on the right is closer to a game like, Celeste or Super Meat Boy or I Want to Be the Guy, I guess. It's closer to a rage game. It's a very hard, challenging game with the entire point of the game being like player skill and getting through these super hard levels, right? It doesn't really teach the same way that its base game would. So moving on to the formula. This is again, it's bold, italicized, and underlined on the top. The general level design formula. I like to follow at least. This applies to all the things I said before, or all the games I talked about. You know what I mean. So very first off, I always like to find the intent of a level, right? This level teaches the player to do X thing, and the player already knows Y things by this point. What I mean by this is like, okay, it's level 1. This level is going to teach the player how to move, and the player doesn't really know anything at this point. Level 2, the player knows how to move, but maybe they don't know about this other mechanic, so we're going to kind of overlap the movement challenges on top of we're going to introduce these new, let's say, shooting mechanics, right? The player already knows how to move, so we're going to challenge that a little bit, and then also introduce shooting mechanics on top of it. Which moves on to the second point, introducing mechanics. So I personally, with the type of games that I like to make, try to provide the player with a low stress, safe environment for them to interact with their new mechanic in. This is most referenced on the GIF on the right of Cuphead, right? The infamous Cuphead tutorial, this is a safe space where nothing can hurt the player, where they're first taught how to do these movement mechanics, right? Dashing in the air, moving around, jumping, getting their sea legs, so to speak. And then next up is repeating mechanic. So provide the player with a number of repetition spaces for this mechanic. Never really just do it once and say, okay, goodbye. We're never going to touch this again until it comes up next. And then move on to the next thing. I write never jump over one box because, in games, in any platformer, I was gonna say Mario, but in any platformer, you never really just jump over one thing. Again, in Cuphead, look, there's the smaller box and the larger box. You don't just jump over the one. There's multiple obstacles for you to go over. So, advanced mechanic and challenge mechanic. What I mean by this is you want to stress the player out a little bit. You want to give them a little, make them think outside the box a little. Like, oh no, I have to use this mechanic in a new way. I didn't think to use it before. Oh, a little player experimentation. Ooh, we get a little spicy with this one, right? What this means in a more like definitive, quantifiable way is change your layout. Add a new obstacle to the player's environment that makes them have to use this mechanic in a different way. This could be, increasing the stress of the player by like adding a new enemy to the space, adding a more powerful enemy where a normally difficult enemy would be, and also adding conflict, right? You want to add conflict and consequence at this point. Like I just said before, like add a new enemy, add a enemy. Remember, sky's the limit. It's a video game. Do whatever the hell you want. And the big thing between these two, because this is like technically 2 points in one. Make sure you do both. It doesn't really matter which order, but you should probably end up doing both. And then next point is add a mechanic, right? If the player's comfortable after you rinse and repeat points 2 and 3 and 4 enough, add something on top, like I just said before. There's plenty of games that you get control of your movement, and then level 2 they introduce some things on top of the movement. So add a new mechanic into the fray. The new mechanic could be one the player has already learned. It could be something new. If it's something new, it'd probably be helpful to follow this flow again, but again, that's up to your game and it's up to you. So cycle, do it again, spice it up, or don't do it again. It kind of depends on your game. Do something unique, do something memorable. Introductions don't exactly need to be repeated, but they can be. Doing that could definitely help, mitigate your player's stress level. And stress and talking about player stress and pacing is an entire other, topic in and of its own. And so, speaking of Mario, let's break this down a little bit. So let's evaluate Mario 1-1, like Mario for the NES, like the OG. This is the Mario, right? And break it down and kind of circle out where these 4 points are talked about. Introduce the mechanic, repeat the mechanic, challenge the mechanic, and advance the mechanic. And we're going to evaluate this through the lens of jumping, right? And just movement in general. So jumping is immediately introduced by putting an obstacle in front of the player, which is the Goomba, right? The little mushroom looking guy. You can't touch him unless you touch him from the top, right? And the player kind of just drops into the game immediately. No prompts, no buttons. I mean, there's only like I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with the D-pad buttons on the NES controller. So there's only so many buttons to hit. So the player would eventually end up hitting the D-pad, going to the right, and probably hit the jump button. And again, like I said before, not everything follows this 100%. So they immediately kind of break a rule of saying like, okay, we're gonna add a hazard immediately. This isn't something the player just has to jump over. It's if they touch it in the wrong way, they die, right? And that's okay. It's just different. And then moving on, we have repeat mechanic, right? So now we have these 3 pipes of varying heights. We're gonna have to keep jumping, right? So you jump over the first one, jump over the second one. Now with a Goomba, so look out. And then we have the 3rd pipe. Then we get past the 3rd pipe. And now we kind of hit like 3 points here. We have the introduction of a new mechanic, which is if you still have a mushroom in your system, this power-up box will give you a fire flower. And that's an entire other kind of gameplay experience. And then we are also kind of challenging the mechanic by saying, okay, you're no longer using your jump to get around something, you're using your jump to go on top of something, right? Elevate, go higher. And then along with that, we're also saying, okay, Goombas are going to fall down on you. If you get hit by a Goomba falling down on you, you die, right? You don't die, but you take damage. That's a penalty. And now to talk about some of the best methods to like improve your level design, honestly, just go make a level. I know it kind of sounds stupid, but like just go make a level. The best way to learn is by doing, in my opinion. And it's unrealistic to ask a person to go make a whole game to practice level design. If you can do it, I mean, that's pretty cool. But, it's unrealistic to ask that. So something I was taught a lot is it's very strong to just go make a fan work of something, right? Modding tools are getting more and more accessible every day. If you have any source game, you already have access to the Hammer editor. Or if you have access to a PC, you'll also have access to Steam and then maybe a source game and Hammer editor. Hammer editor is one of the, it's like a built-in editor for most source games, early source games at least. So, like CSGO, I don't even know if you can still play CSGO at this point. You know what I mean? TF2, things along those lines. Portal 2 is honestly huge. Portal 2 even has like the built-in, like in-game level editor. And along with that, like ROM hacks are also very cool in my opinion, like making a fan work out of an existing game. I remember I was talking to a designer once about wanting to work on a Left 4 Dead 2 level during an interview. And we went off for like 30 minutes talking about how, fan custom levels in source games like that are so fun and they're so cool and they provide so much more content than the original game planned. It's strong stuff to have in your portfolio. And along with that, not to diss making your own game, go ahead, make your own game. Showing that you can sit down and make something all the way through is super strong as well. And you're just as valid. If you don't want to sit down and make a game, do some explorations. Don't just play, record, evaluate, plan, break it down. Like, really sit down and map out how a level, like maybe your favorite level in a game, is laid out. There's so many different games in the world, and they all have levels to some degree. Pick one and break it down. Look at it with a critical eye. Look into how it works, right? Like, biggest example being like Mario from Sonic. Like, again, yeah, the originals were both just 2D platformers, right? But Mario's a lot more linear. Sonic has multiple pathways. There's so many different ways to look at it. And then just some helpful readings and cool sources that I used to, like, in my own works. Level Design Concept Theory and Practice by Rudolf Kramers is a very good book. It's really, really informative. The Art of Game Design, and then The Art of Game Design by Jesse Schell, and The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman are both really good, just general design books, right? The Design of Everyday Things is really strong for more practical design, right? Like, the biggest point from that book that I love talking about is it talks about like why door handles are shaped the way they are. Like, if you ever pushed on a pull door and pulled on a push door in real life, those are poorly designed kind of deal. And that book kind of like talks about that kind of concept. And then there's this website called noclip.website by a guy named Jasper. It's a really, really cool website that kind of just lets you in browser view levels from a lot of games. There's a finite amount of games on there, right? Because, pretty taxing to make, I assume. But if you ever wanted to sit down and explore the level just in browser, that's a wonderful place to do it. And then also, of course, the GDC YouTube channel is kind of just there. There's a lot of really good talks on level design there if you want to get more into it. And yeah, that's my talk. Thanks for coming.